They told me I was selfish, that I'd never amount to anything without following their path. When my own parents rejected my dreams and kicked me out of their house, they thought they'd broken me. But instead, they unleashed a hunger in me that would fuel the rise of a $100 million business. This is the raw, unfiltered story of how I built an empire to prove my family wrong. Forever. My name is Emma, and I'm the founder and CEO of a tech startup that is now valued at over $100 million. It hasn't always been this way. In fact, I come from a family where dreams were rarely supported, and being anything other than what was expected of you was considered foolish. For as long as I can remember, I wanted to create something on my own, build a business that could stand tall and challenge the status quo. But my dreams were met with resistance, especially from my parents. It wasn't just disappointment I felt when I tried to share my vision. It was disdain. I could see the disapproval in their eyes when I told them I didn't want to follow the traditional path. My parents had their own version of the American dream in mind, one where I'd go to college, secure a corporate job, and make a good living just like they did. They believed the safest route was always the one with the least risk, and they couldn't understand why I wanted to take a different one. To them, business was for people who were either born into money or had a well-structured plan, and since I was neither, my aspirations seemed reckless at best. But I was determined, and I pushed forward. I enrolled in college not because it was what I wanted, but because it was what they expected. I majored in business, a compromise that I thought might keep the peace, but also gave me a glimpse into the world I longed to be a part of. But the more I learned, the more disillusioned I became. All the lessons and textbooks felt so irrelevant to what I really wanted to do. I didn't want to be another cog in a corporate machine. I wanted to create my own machine, my own empire. The tension at home grew as I advanced through college. Every holiday dinner or family gathering became an opportunity for my parents to remind me of the real world and how important it was to focus on a stable career. "There's no guarantee in business," they'd say. "You have to take care of yourself first, not chase fantasies." And it was clear they thought that was exactly what I was doing. Chasing fantasies. The breaking point came one night during a dinner at their house. I had just received an internship offer at a startup that seemed like the perfect stepping stone for my own ambitions. I was eager to tell them, hoping for some semblance of support or at least understanding. But instead, I was met with anger and frustration. My mom, in tears, told me that I was wasting my potential on something that would never work. "You're smart enough to have a real career," she said. "Why can't you just do what everyone else does?" My dad, ever the pragmatic one, added, "This isn't a fairy tale. You'll be out on your own with nothing." That night, everything came to a head. I'd spent years trying to make them see my vision, but their response was always the same. Instead of feeling motivated, I felt trapped. It wasn't just the rejection of my dreams, it was the rejection of who I was becoming. I wasn't their perfect daughter. I wasn't the woman they thought I should be. But for the first time, that didn't feel like a curse. It felt like liberation. That evening, I packed a suitcase and walked out of the house. I didn't look back. There was nothing left for me there. It wasn't just that they didn't support me, it was that they didn't believe in me, and that was something I could never accept. When I walked out, I had no money, no apartment, and no clear path, but I had one thing that was more important: my belief in myself. I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all my family, decide my future for me. From that moment on, it was going to be me against the world. I wasn't just going to prove them wrong. I was going to build something that no one could ignore. I was going to show everyone that I didn't need their approval to succeed, and that was exactly what I did. Leaving my parents' house was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it also marked the beginning of the most transformative period of my life. The world outside wasn't kind to me at first. I had no money, no safety net, and I was living in a dingy apartment in a less than ideal part of the city. I didn't even have a proper job at that point. The internship at the startup was still months away, and even then, it was just an unpaid role with long hours and little guarantee that it would lead to anything substantial. But it was the first step, small, uncertain, but mine. I remember how humbling it was, working late into the night just to complete basic tasks that felt like they barely scratched the surface of my ambitions. I was earning nothing, relying on savings I had barely accumulated from odd freelance jobs in college. It was easy to second guess myself, to wonder if I'd made a colossal mistake. But I pushed through because I couldn't let myself go back. I had to prove to myself and to the world that I wasn't just some dreamer with no follow through. This was my fight, and I wasn't about to give up. Days were spent trying to get my foot in the door. I worked at the startup, made connections, and learned everything I could about the tech world. I wasn't just a passive observer. I actively looked for ways to contribute and innovate. When I wasn't working, I was networking, talking to anyone who would listen. I didn't care if they were junior employees or senior executives. I needed to build my network, understand the industry, and make my presence known. But even in this fast-paced environment, there were moments of intense doubt. I'd watch other employees at the startup, those who had a track record, formal education, and families who supported their dreams. They were far more polished and experienced than me. And then there was me, self-taught, unpolished, and feeling a constant pressure to prove I deserved to be there. It didn't help when some colleagues would dismiss me because I wasn't following the same path they had. One night, I had a breakdown. I sat in my tiny apartment staring at the blank screen of my laptop, overwhelmed by the idea of building something of my own when the world seemed so determined to tell me that it wasn't possible. I wanted to quit, go back to the safe route my parents had mapped out for me. I wanted to ignore all the risk and just get a stable job where I could stop constantly worrying about how I would make ends meet. But I knew deep down that quitting wasn't an option. I remembered what it felt like to walk out of my parents' house. The sense of freedom mingled with fear, and I realized I couldn't go back to that life. I'd already cut the cord. I wasn't about to let fear dictate my future. I dusted myself off, took a deep breath, and got back to work the next day. Slowly but surely, I began to learn, grow, and adapt. There was no magic formula for success. It was a grind. Long hours, failed attempts, and plenty of moments where I felt like everything was falling apart. But then one day, something clicked. A potential investor took notice of my ideas, and just like that, I found myself getting a shot. The startup that I had been working for might not have been the place where I would ultimately find success, but it had been a stepping stone. It had given me access to the right networks, the knowledge I needed, and the momentum to move forward. I used that small window of opportunity to make my next move. I didn't have much, but I had a clear idea of what I wanted to create. I wanted to build a company that combined the best of technology and social impact, something that could revolutionize how businesses interacted with consumers and empowered everyday people. I didn't have all the pieces, but I knew what the puzzle could look like, and that was enough to get me started. At the beginning, it wasn't glamorous. My first office was a cramped co-working space with barely any privacy, and I had to take on side jobs just to keep the lights on. I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. I sacrificed my social life, my comfort, my time, everything. I didn't mind. In fact, I loved it. I was building something from scratch, and that was the most exhilarating feeling in the world. Every little victory, whether it was securing a small client, landing a partnership, or even just getting through a tough day, felt like a monumental achievement. I was on my own now. There was no one to tell me what to do or how to do it. But that freedom came with its own set of challenges. I had to learn the hard way how to handle rejection and failure, and there was plenty of both. But each setback taught me something crucial. I learned how to navigate obstacles, pivot when necessary, and stay focused on the bigger picture. Looking back, those early days were some of the hardest of my life, but they were also the most transformative. They taught me resilience, determination, and most importantly, that success wasn't just about talent or luck, it was about how you kept going, even when it felt like the world was telling you no. As I pushed forward, I felt a fire inside me that I hadn't felt before. I wasn't just trying to build a business anymore, I was building my legacy. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone or anything stop me from seeing it through. I had spent nearly 2 years in the trenches, hustling, grinding, and sacrificing so much of myself to keep the dream alive. The company was moving forward, but the progress felt slow. I had a few clients, a growing network, and a team of passionate people around me, but we were still far from the success I envisioned. Money was tight, and I found myself constantly juggling cash flow and spending just to keep everything afloat. There were days when I wondered if it would all be worth it. Was I really building something sustainable, or was I just chasing a dream that would never materialize? Then, just as I was about to reach the point where the stress was becoming too much to bear, I got the call that changed everything. One of the investors I'd been courting for months, a big player in the tech world, finally agreed to meet with me. I had pitched to them before, but this time I had refined my approach. I had a clearer vision of where I wanted the company to go, a well-defined strategy, and a sense of unwavering belief in my product. I knew this could be the moment that changed everything. The meeting was set for 10 a.m., and I spent the entire night preparing. I rehearsed my pitch over and over again, fine-tuning the details, making sure everything was perfect. I could barely sleep, my mind racing with scenarios, doubts, and possibilities. This was it. This was the chance I had been waiting for. When I arrived at their office the next morning, I was nervous, but there was a sense of purpose that drove me forward. I had come so far, and I knew that this was the opportunity I needed to seize. The investor, a well-known venture capitalist named Alan, sat across from me, his steely gaze sizing me up. He was calm, composed, but I could see the challenge in his eyes. He wasn't someone easily impressed. We spent the first few minutes talking about my background, my business model, and what had brought me to this point. I could feel the weight of his scrutiny, but I held my ground. I spoke passionately about the company's mission, how we were going to change the way the industry approached customer engagement, how we were going to create something that wasn't just about profits, but about making a real difference in people's lives. I knew that this was more than just a business to me. It was a cause, and I needed him to see that. And then it came down to the pivotal moment. Alan asked the question that had been lingering in my mind for months. Emma, how badly do you want this? What's your biggest gamble? I paused for a moment, weighing the gravity of his question. To be honest, I wasn't sure how to respond. How badly did I want this? I had already sacrificed so much, my savings, my time, my relationships, but this moment, was the one where I had to put everything on the line. I could no longer rely on the slow growth, the small wins, or the incremental progress. I had to bet everything on one big move. I'll tell you exactly how badly I want this, I said, my voice steady but filled with conviction. I'm ready to gamble it all. Every dollar I have, every ounce of energy I can give. If you're willing to back me, I'll show you that I can make this work. Not just for me, but for everyone who believes in the vision. The room was silent for what felt like an eternity. Alan leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together as he considered my response. Then, without warning, he gave me the nod. All right, I'm in. I'll invest in your company. The sense of relief that washed over me was overwhelming. My heart raced as I tried to process what had just happened. This was the moment I had dreamed of. The breakthrough that could take everything I had built to the next level. Alan's investment was a game changer. It wasn't just money, it was validation, a signal that I was on the right path and that the world was finally starting to recognize the value of what I was creating. But with this breakthrough came an entirely new set of challenges. The stakes were higher now. I had the investment, but I also had expectations. I had to deliver, and there was no room for failure. The pressure was intense. I could no longer afford to take small steps or play it safe. I had to think big, act fast, and push beyond my limits. This was the moment where everything was going to either take off or fall apart. Over the next few months, I poured every ounce of my energy into making sure the company could scale rapidly. I hired the right people, developed new products, and expanded our services. We didn't just want to be another tech startup. We wanted to revolutionize the industry. Every decision I made felt monumental. Every move I took had the weight of the investment behind it, and I could feel the pressure mounting. But I wasn't afraid anymore. This was my shot, and I wasn't going to let it slip through my fingers. There were days when I questioned whether I had the strength to carry all the responsibility. But those moments of doubt were fleeting because I knew I had something that no one could take away from me: my vision, my resilience, and my willingness to keep pushing forward no matter how hard it got. I was finally getting the recognition I had craved for so long. The product started gaining traction, and we began landing major clients. The business began to grow exponentially. Our first real breakthrough came when we secured a multi-million-dollar contract with a Fortune 500 company. It was a huge validation of everything we had been working toward, and it proved to me that I wasn't crazy for believing in myself when no one else did. But success isn't always as sweet as it seems. With growth came new challenges, operational hurdles, staffing issues, and the constant pressure to scale faster than we could keep up. There were days when I thought about throwing in the towel, but I always reminded myself of why I started. I was building something that was bigger than me, and no matter what it took, I was going to see it through. The climb to success wasn't a straight path. In fact, as the company grew, the pressure became overwhelming. When you're no longer just running a small startup but overseeing a rapidly expanding business, every decision feels like it could be make or break. Every investor call, every meeting with a potential partner, every strategic move became a heavy burden. And what nobody tells you when you're building a business is that success brings its own set of challenges, many of them tied to personal identity and staying true to yourself. For the first time in my life, I felt pulled in so many directions. There were board meetings where I had to be CEO Emma, the face of the company, calm, collected, and fully in control. Then there were moments when I was just Emma, the founder of a company who was struggling to balance her vision with the reality of managing people, finances, and constant growth. I had always prided myself on my authenticity, but as the stakes rose, I found myself slipping away from the person I had been. I began making compromises, not because I wanted to, but because I felt like I had to. Investors wanted faster returns, and potential clients demanded features I didn't believe aligned with our company's core mission. At times, I questioned if I was still building the company I had envisioned, or if I was just chasing the next big deal to keep the momentum going. The stress was immense. I started to feel disconnected from the people around me, my team, my friends, even my own thoughts. Long hours at the office became the norm, and personal time was sacrificed for business meetings that never seemed to end. I remember one evening after a particularly grueling week, sitting in my office at 2 a.m., staring blankly at my laptop, unsure of who I had become. I had sacrificed so much of my life to make this company a success, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had also lost parts of myself along the way. I was so focused on scaling and reaching the next milestone that I forgot the most important thing. Why did I start this in the first place? It took a conversation with my closest friend, Sarah, to snap me back to reality. She had been there with me from the beginning, supporting me when everyone else doubted my potential. We had shared countless late-night talks about our dreams and visions for the future, and she was one of the few people who really understood why I wanted to build a business that could change the world. Sarah had always been the voice of reason, the one who reminded me why I started this journey in the first place, so I could create something that mattered, not just something that would make money. "Emma," she said during one of our phone calls, "you've built this incredible business, but what's the point if you're losing yourself in the process? When was the last time you thought about the vision, the one you had before all this pressure came in?" Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I realized that somewhere along the way, I had stopped thinking about the bigger picture. I had become so focused on chasing success that I had lost sight of why I started this journey in the first place: to create something meaningful, something that wasn't just about making money or pleasing investors, but about making a real impact. That conversation sparked a shift in me. I couldn't afford to keep compromising my values and my vision. If I was going to lead this company, I had to do it on my terms. I needed to realign myself with the original purpose that had fueled me when I had nothing but a dream and a laptop. The next few months were a period of reckoning. I had to take a hard look at my priorities, my goals, and what I wanted this company to represent. It wasn't enough to just be a successful CEO anymore. I needed to make sure that the company stayed true to its roots, innovative, ethical, and driven by a mission that was greater than profits. I called a meeting with my leadership team and laid it all on the table. I told them about the internal struggle I had been facing and how I felt we were drifting away from the mission we had set out to accomplish. I challenged everyone in the room to think about what we truly stood for and how we could reinvigorate the company with that vision. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was one that needed to happen. From that point on, I made a vow to myself that I would no longer let external pressures dictate my decisions. I would focus on what mattered most to me and my team, the impact we could have on the industry and the people we served. I stopped chasing the next big deal and instead focused on sustainable growth that was aligned with our values. It was liberating, but it was also a difficult balance to strike. The world of business is filled with demands and expectations, and there were plenty of people who didn't like the changes I was making. Some of the investors pushed back, saying I was being too idealistic, that it was time to focus more on the bottom line. But I wasn't willing to compromise on our core mission. I knew that if I gave in now, everything I had worked for would lose its meaning. Over time, things started to settle. Our company culture shifted, and we began to attract more clients who shared our values. We started seeing real results, not just in terms of profit, but in terms of impact. Our product was making a difference, and that was all that mattered. I felt a sense of pride that I hadn't felt in months. I had rediscovered the joy of building something meaningful, and I was no longer lost in the chaos of growth for the sake of growth. And while the journey was far from over, I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer just building a business. I was building something that mattered, and that was worth every sacrifice. With the renewed sense of purpose and clarity, my company began to evolve in ways I hadn't anticipated. There was a shift in the energy among my team, our investors, and myself. It felt like we were finally on the right path, but this is where things got even more complicated. Scaling a business is one of the hardest, most unpredictable parts of entrepreneurship, and we were about to step into the fire. At first, I was optimistic. We had a product people loved, we had the team to support the growth, and we had a mission that resonated with the market. But scaling wasn't as simple as hiring more people and doubling down on marketing. There were endless decisions to make: how to structure the business for long-term success, how to maintain quality while expanding, and most importantly, how to keep the company culture intact as we grew. We were in the midst of a significant product launch, one that we had been preparing for months. It had the potential to redefine the market and take us from a niche player to a dominant force. But the closer we got to launch day, the more I realized how much was riding on its success. Every detail had to be perfect, and every misstep would be magnified on a much larger scale. I started losing sleep again, feeling the pressure to make sure everything went off without a hitch. The first setback came when we learned that the product we had developed wasn't quite ready for the launch we had been planning. Testing showed that there were several bugs and usability issues that couldn't be ignored. In my gut, I knew the right thing to do was to delay the launch, but everything inside me was screaming to push forward. I was terrified that delaying it would hurt our momentum. We had already invested so much, and I feared that any further setbacks would make us look unprofessional and out of our depth. But after several sleepless nights, I made the tough call. We delayed the launch, even though I knew it would disappoint investors and clients who had been eagerly waiting. At first, it felt like a failure. The thought of having to explain to everyone why we had to push the timeline back weighed heavily on me. However, when I finally made the announcement, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Investors praised our commitment to quality, and customers respected that we weren't rushing something that wasn't ready. It was a lesson in resilience and patience that I would carry with me for the rest of my career. Sometimes doing things the right way, even at the expense of immediate success, is the only way to build something sustainable. In the months that followed, we slowly started seeing the benefits of that decision. The product, when it finally launched, exceeded all expectations. It was stable, polished, and exactly what the market needed. But the journey to get there was one of the most challenging I had ever faced. As we started scaling, the financial risks grew exponentially. We needed to secure more capital to fund the expansion, and this time, we couldn't rely on just one investor. We had to raise a significant round of funding. The pressure mounted again, and this time, I felt the weight of responsibility in a way I hadn't before. The stakes weren't just about building a business anymore, it was about securing the livelihoods of everyone in my company, from my employees to the partners we worked with. We brought in top-tier venture capitalists and institutional investors who were willing to place significant bets on our company. But with that came an entirely new set of challenges. Expectations were higher, and the game had changed. We were no longer a small startup with the freedom to experiment. We had to deliver, and we had to deliver fast. That period of expansion was marked by constant risk. There were times when we weren't sure if we had enough runway to make it through the next few months. But my team and I pushed through, taking calculated risks that paid off in unexpected ways. We expanded into new markets, increased our offerings, and doubled down on building relationships with key players in the industry. One of the most rewarding aspects of scaling was watching the culture of the company evolve. Despite the growing pains and long hours, we managed to keep the team aligned with the mission. It wasn't always easy, but the passion and commitment of the people I had surrounded myself with kept me grounded. We were all in it together, and it felt like every small victory was a collective triumph. However, scaling isn't just about increasing revenue or signing bigger deals, it's about dealing with the personal cost that comes with all that growth. I found myself losing the balance I had worked so hard to establish. My health, my relationships, and even my mental well being began to take a back seat. There were days when I couldn't remember the last time I had taken a moment to just breathe, to disconnect from the never ending demands of the business. It was during one of these moments of reflection that I realized I had to redefine what success meant for me. The business had grown, the company was becoming a leader in its field, but I was at a crossroads. Was success just about the numbers, or was it about finding a sustainable path that allowed me to enjoy the fruits of my labor without losing myself along the way? That's when I decided to implement changes that would not only protect the company's future, but also my own. I restructured our leadership team to allow for greater delegation, bringing in experienced professionals who could take on more responsibility. I started setting boundaries for myself, dedicating time to my family and friends, ensuring I took days off to recharge. I realized that to truly lead, I couldn't burn out. I had to lead by example. He's not just in terms of pushing the company forward, but in showing my team that balance and self-care were just as important as hustle and growth. As the company continued to expand, I found a renewed sense of purpose. Scaling was no longer just a race to the top. It was about creating something sustainable, something that would last for the long haul. The road to getting there wasn't easy, but it was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. And with each new milestone, I knew that the best was yet to come. But I also knew that the real journey wasn't about chasing external success. It was about continuing to build a legacy that would make a lasting impact, not just for me, but for the people who had been with me every step of the way. Success was no longer just about the money. It was about the people I had the privilege to lead and the positive change we could create together. As the company grew into something far beyond what I had ever imagined, there was a strange paradox I found myself facing. On the one hand, I had built a thriving business that was turning a profit and creating a significant impact in the industry. On the other hand, I felt an unsettling emptiness that I couldn't shake. In my pursuit of success, I had focused so much on the goal that I hadn't fully considered what that success would truly mean for me once I had it. For years, I had defined success by tangible metrics: revenue, growth, client acquisition, and market share. I had let these numbers dictate my self-worth, and for a while, they fueled me. But as I sat in my office late one evening, overlooking the city skyline, I realized something profound. The constant drive for more clients, more deals, more recognition, had left me disconnected from my own sense of fulfillment. Success, in its rawest form, had become a pursuit for external validation, and I was beginning to question if that was enough. It wasn't the first time I had felt this way, but this time I knew the stakes were different. I had reached the top, but the question lingered. What now? I didn't want to keep scaling for the sake of scaling. I didn't want to keep building something just to say I had done it. I wanted my success to have meaning, to resonate beyond numbers and acquisitions. It was during a week-long retreat, surrounded by some of the most inspiring entrepreneurs and thought leaders in the industry, that I had a revelation. I realized that while business was still a huge part of who I was, it wasn't the only part. I had spent so much of my life focusing on proving myself to others, on showing the world that I could make it without anyone's help, that I had forgotten the importance of giving back to my community, to the people who had supported me, and to those who could benefit from my experiences. The retreat was the perfect moment of pause I needed. We spent hours discussing leadership, sustainability, and purpose, and somewhere in those conversations, I discovered what had been missing for me. It wasn't just about making money, it was about using my platform, my business, and my resources to make a real difference in the lives of others. I had the power to create opportunities for people, to give them the same chances I had, and I realized I wanted my legacy to be built on that. When I returned home, I took immediate steps to realign the company's mission. We weren't just in business to disrupt an industry. We were in business to change lives. I introduced new initiatives to our team, focusing not just on profit, but on the societal impact we could have. We launched a scholarship fund for women in tech, supported mentorship programs for young entrepreneurs, and partnered with nonprofits to provide tech education to underserved communities. The changes weren't radical, but they were significant. It wasn't just about scaling anymore, it was about doing so responsibly, with the awareness that our success came with a moral obligation to lift others up along the way. As a company, we shifted our focus from being solely profit driven to being people driven. And as a leader, I started to view my role less as a CEO and more as a mentor, a guide, and a facilitator for growth, both for my team and for the communities we were serving. The beauty of this new approach was that it gave me a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt before. Yes, we were still aiming for financial success, but now it felt like it was in service of something greater. We were creating jobs, changing lives, and making a tangible difference in the world. The company's impact was no longer measured by how much money we made, but by how much positive change we could create. On a personal level, this shift also brought a sense of peace I had been craving for years. I stopped defining myself by my business achievements alone and began to see my success as part of a much larger story. It wasn't just about climbing the ladder, it was about building something that would last long after I was gone, something that would continue to create value for generations to come. With this newfound sense of purpose, I found the balance I had been searching for. I learned how to delegate more effectively, how to trust my team to lead in ways I couldn't, and how to enjoy the fruits of my labor without feeling guilty. I started taking vacations, spending more time with friends, and even revisiting old hobbies I had long abandoned. But even more than that, I began to understand that my story was not just about me anymore. It was about the people who had helped me along the way, the mentors, the investors, the employees who believed in the vision before it was a reality. It was about the young women in tech who could now look at me and see someone who had walked the same path they were about to take and succeeded. It was about being a role model, not just in business, but in life. In the years that followed, the company continued to thrive. We expanded into new markets, doubled our workforce, and saw incredible growth. But the true measure of success wasn't in the numbers anymore. It was in the lives we touched, the people we inspired, and the legacy we began to build together. As I sit back and reflect on this journey, from the rejection that sparked my drive, to the challenges and sacrifices, to the success I've achieved, I am reminded of one undeniable truth. Success is never just about what you achieve. It's about how you use that success to impact the world around you. I didn't get here by accident. I got here because I believed in myself when no one else did. I took risks when others told me it was too dangerous. And most importantly, I stayed true to my vision, even when the path seemed uncertain. Now, I don't just look at the company as a business, I look at it as a legacy of resilience, of strength, of purpose. I built something that matters, and in the end, that's all that truly matters. And for anyone out there who feels like their dreams are too big, too impossible, or too risky, I'm here to tell you this. The road will be hard, the journey will be long, and you will face challenges that will make you question everything. But if you believe in yourself, if you hold on to your vision, and if you stay true to your purpose, you will create something that will last, and nothing can take that away from you.